Okay, good evening. Welcome to 4 Shocks from the Kabbalah, a little series that we're going to do, an introductory course in Kabbalistic thought, looking at some of the ideas from the Kabbalah that are more surprising and transformative as well, that can really change your life if you take them in and take them on. And the Kabbalah, briefly, just to give a little introduction to what it is, it's the soul of Judaism, and it's the soul of Torah. You really can't have Judaism and Torah without the Kabbalah. Just like you can't have a person, a body without a soul, is not alive, so too Judaism without its mystical side is not living, it's not alive. It's the soul of Judaism. And even though Kabbalah has been held under wraps in some circles throughout some parts of history, but it's always been there. It's always been in the background. It's always seeped into mainstream Judaism. And as time has gone on, it has come higher towards the surface. And this was something that was predicted by the Kabbalists themselves. They said there'll come a time when everybody's going to be studying this. Even children are going to know the secrets of Kabbalah. It's going to be out there for everybody. And we are living in that time. Thank God. And so Kabbalah, it's always been there. When I say it's always been there, it's the soul of Torah. The Torah was given at Mount Sinai. The Kabbalah was also given at Mount Sinai. In fact, the Sinai experience was much more of a Kabbalistic experience than a revealed Torah experience because it was a revelation. There was a spiritual revelation that the Jewish people experienced at Mount Sinai. It was a mystical experience that they had, which was then translated into words and into a book and into what we call the Torah. Even before the Torah was given, the Torah was known by our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They had wisdom of the Torah. It wasn't written as a book yet. And there was wisdom of Kabbalah in their times as well. In fact, we do have a book of Kabbalah even today called Sefer Yetzirah, which means the book of formation, which are the teachings of Abraham, our forefather Abraham, the mystical teachings that he taught that were later committed to writing. And in fact, it goes back even further than that. From the beginning of time, Adam, the very first human being, was taught mystical secrets by an angel, whose the name of the angel was Raziel. And we have a book. We have the book. The book was written down, Raziel HaMalach, the book of the angel Raziel, which were the teachings that Adam was revealed and handed down to the Kabbalists of the future times. These books are all available. I've got them on my shelf at home. In fact, the book of Yetzirah has been translated into English. I don't know if Raziel HaMalach has, I don't think so, although I'm sure somebody online has somewhere translated it. But the book of creation, the book of formation, which was Abraham's book, has been translated into English. You can try and read it if you want, but it's like reading a foreign language. It's extremely opaque and very difficult book to read, as are many of the Kabbalistic works that have been translated. Whether they're in translation or in the original, they're not easy generally to read. They're written in mystical language, in a sort of secret type of language for the initiated. The initiated can understand it and reveal its secrets, but it's not something you can just open up and read. And that's because the word Kabbalah means, any Hebrew speakers here? Kabbalah means? Receive, to receive. Why is it called receive? Because the teaching has to be received. It's not something that you can just do on your own. It has to be received from a teacher who themselves has received it from a teacher all the way back to the unbroken chain. You have to be initiated into it by somebody who themselves was initiated into it. And more specifically, the teachings of Kabbalah can't be made up by somebody. They have to be received from a higher source. You can either receive lessons from a wise sage who has learnt it from their teachers, or you receive it from an even higher source. The original works of Kabbalah were revelations. The Kabbalists who taught the works of Kabbalah were teaching revelations that they received from a higher place. Many of them were taught by Elijah, Eliyahu Navi, the prophet Elijah, who appeared to them and taught them lessons. Some from other angelic forces and divine revelations. It's a major thing to be a Kabbalist and to write a Kabbalistic work. It's not just somebody who's original and intelligent and creative. It's somebody who's spiritually connected to a very high place. Having said all that, as time has gone on, the Kabbalah has become more and more available and accessible. In early generations, there was a secret society of Kabbalists who would teach Kabbalistic lessons to a select few people. Every generation just had a few little people who would study it and learn it. And you had to be worthy to be let into that little circle. It wasn't for public consumption. And it was kept that way intentionally because the world was not yet ready for its light to be revealed. But as I said, the early Kabbalists said, there'll come a time when it will be revealed and it will come out. And that time has been really building up in the last couple of centuries to the point where today you can access authentic, real Kabbalah in your language, online, anywhere you look, you can find it, and it's real stuff. Not all Kabbalah is real stuff, I must say. There are some scam Kabbalah teachers who force you to pay a lot of money usually, and you have to buy a lot of books and sign up here and join this sort of a bit of a cult type of thing. There are people who utilize Kabbalah to make money or to control people. That is certainly there. But real, true Kabbalists are out there and are teaching, and their teachings are very much available in our time. And this is because as Jewish history, it always has two sort of points to it. There's the point of the past where we come from, and there's the point where we're going to in the future. And what's quite unique about the Jewish people is that our history is really built on the looking forward to a future time, the coming of Mashiach, the Messianic age, when the world is going to come to its fruition and everything's going to be good. We don't just build on our past, but we are drawn by a bright future. And so the Kabbalists all said that as we approach that end time, that time of ultimate goodness, these teachings, the teachings of the soul, the deeper soul, come more to the surface and become more available. We have a more spiritual world. And so the world we live in today, you could look at it in two different ways. You could say we live in a terrible time, terrible world. Did you check the news today? Did you check yesterday? We see what's going on? Terrible things are happening. Wars and destruction and what we've seen in the last year and a half. What a terrible, horrible, sad, painful, dark, evil world we live in. And anyone who reads the news can come to that conclusion. But you could also say something else, and that is that actually we live in an incredible world. We live in a world way better than any of our forebears lived in. Yes, there's a lot of pain and destruction, and we're much more exposed to it than previous times, because we can immediately see what's going on anywhere in the world. But we live in a world where there's way less pain and suffering than any previous generation, way less war than any previous generation, and much more goodness going on, much more yearning for unity, for oneness, for peace, for a higher living, much more than any other time in history. The Kabbalists said that's what's going to happen. The world is going to get better, and it gets better as it continues, and it goes higher and higher. It's getting close to its fruition, and therefore, it's the time in history for these lessons to come to the fore and to be made available, and that's the time that we live, and we're very blessed to live in this time. So the way we're going to do this is that I'm going to share with you ideas from the Kabbalah that are shocks, that are surprising, that you wouldn't necessarily expect the Kabbalah or any traditional spiritual teaching to share, and to show how original and powerful and deep and also very practical the ideas of Kabbalah are. And the one we're going to start off with is the idea that atheism is right. The atheists are correct. They have a point. There's a Kabbalistic view of atheism that shows that atheism actually has a good point. We live in a time, as spiritual as our time is, we also live in a time where atheism has become quite popular, quite a big thing, which wasn't necessarily in past generations and times. There were always atheists, but atheism as a movement didn't really exist much in the distant past. In fact, until a couple hundred years ago, there was not really a concept of atheism as a movement or a philosophy. Until the Enlightenment in Europe in the 1600s, to be called an atheist was more of like an insult that like the church or the religious authorities would call somebody who was not behaving. They weren't following the rules. They're an atheist. That's what they'd be called. The person wouldn't call themselves an atheist. There wasn't a movement of atheism. There was just like an insult for somebody who's misbehaving. You're an atheist. Whereas around the 1600s, there became a bit of a movement of atheism as a philosophy, as a belief system, that we don't believe in any God. In the ancient world, there were people who rebelled against the gods, but not because they thought they didn't exist, just because they thought they don't care about us. We don't need to be involved. We don't need to care about them because they don't care about us. No one denied the existence of God. It's a much more recent thing. And interestingly, if you look at the history of atheism, you'll see that atheism has arisen and has become popular at the exact same time as Kabbalah was becoming more popular and more out there. The exact time where the great Kabbalists of the Middle Ages started to reveal their teachings was the time when atheism started to rise. In the 1600s, the teachings of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, from the city of Tzfat in northern Israel, his teachings took on like wildfire in the Jewish world at exactly the same time as atheism was taking a rise in Europe. In the 1700s, when the Hasidic movement came about, which was founded by the Baal Shem Tov, a great mystic who believed that everybody needs to hear these lessons and they have to be applied to people's lives. As his movement became popular, that's when atheism was taking root in the world as well, in the Western world. And this is not by accident. That there are two things going on here. There's, on the one hand, the mystical soul being revealed, and the counter voice that is against that idea of there being a God was also rising at the same time. And as we'll see, these two powers that are being revealed come together and actually work together. You know, there's an idea in business called co-opetition. You know what co-opetition is? Where instead of fighting against your opposition, you know, the people who you work with them, you utilize their ideas, you bring them on. Instead of fighting or competing, you cooperate. So there's a radical idea from a Kabbalistic perspective that the ideas that atheism are presenting actually can fit very nicely with Kabbalistic ideas and are helpful. Atheism is very helpful for us. Now, before we get into that, let me be clear. We believe in God. Atheism is not the doctrine of Kabbalah. Kabbalah is all about God. In fact, it's a radical belief in God. A Kabbalist doesn't just believe in God. For a Kabbalist, belief in God is actually unnecessary. God is the most obvious reality there is. You don't need to be convinced to believe in God if you're into Kabbalah. That's the most obvious reality. What you need to be convinced is that anything else exists other than God. Because from a Kabbalist perspective, what they see all around them is God, is the divine reality. God is the all-encompassing, all-powerful entity and reality and being. So the idea that God exists, that doesn't require convincing. You don't need to even believe that. That's just fact. That's just obvious. Just look around. Look at the complexity of the universe and the wonder of the universe. Of course, this is divine. That's obvious. The question is, does the universe actually exist, or is it just God? Is there just God? There's a line in the Kabbalistic works that says that for most people, reality, the physical reality, is obvious. The divine reality is news. We look around and we see a world. We know there's a world. We need to be told that there's a God who created the world. We need to figure that out. That's the normal way of looking at things. The Kabbalistic way of looking at things is God's reality is obvious. Obviously, there's God. That's true reality. The question is, does anything else exist? Or is this just a facade? Is this just an illusion? Is there a real world, or is it just God? And there's a fascinating discussion amongst the Kabbalists. Well, is the world real, or is it just an illusion? Do we really exist, or is it just imaginary? Are we really here, or is it just God here? Well, I guess we don't have to answer that if we're not here, do we? Like, what's the point of the conversation if we're not here? We could end it there. We could just go home, which doesn't exist either. So where are we going to go? Like, what are we doing? It's almost like you give yourself a headache. Like, do we exist or not exist? But the Kabbalists say, no, yeah, we do exist. We absolutely do exist. We just don't exist the way we think we exist. We think we exist as a separate entity from God, and really we're an expression of the divine. Everything is God, and God is everything. There's nothing outside of God. The mistake we make is thinking that we're separate from him. We're not really. And he created that image so we'd have free choice. He created us in a way that we feel separate from him, so we'd have free choice. Otherwise, we'd just be his puppets. So he's given us the illusion of separateness, so our life is real, we have autonomy, but actually really, we're all a part of his one reality, one truth. I was once asked by a Hindu that, why can't you worship an idol? Why in Judaism it says you can't bow down to an idol? Why not? Don't you believe that God is everything and everything is God? And he had read a bit of the Kabbalistic teachings. He said, the Kabbalistic teachings teach that everything is God and God is everything. There's nothing outside of God. So why can't you bow down to an idol? What's wrong with bowing to an idol? Isn't that God too? Is God not there? So I answered that as long as you're seeing an idol, then you're bowing down to not God. If you're saying, I'm bowing down to this, you're not seeing God. Yes, God is everywhere and everything and in everything and is the true reality of everything. That's true. But as long as I'm bowing down to this, so then I'm not seeing God. Any figure, any shape, any form, any being that I say, this is God, I'm missing the point. I'm not seeing the truth. Why this? Everything is God. So then I can't bow to that because that's specifying this as being God. Everything is God, but I can't see it. I'm seeing this. They say that Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe who authored the Tanya, one of the great mystics, on his deathbed, he asked one of his children, he pointed to the beam in the room that he was lying in bed, and he pointed to the beam and said, what do you see there? He said, a beam. And he said, I just see the divine energy. Like, that's all he could see. He couldn't see the beam. If you can't see the beam, so then you're not bowing to it. You can only see the divine energy that's around. But as long as you're seeing a thing, you're bowing to something else. So some have described the Kabbalistic belief system as being radical monotheism. Monotheism is that there's one God. Radical monotheism is there is only God and nothing else. And everything else we see is just the facade that God made it look like there's something else, but it's really just God. And our mission in life is to try and fuse those two views, to try and find the godly in everything. Even though we can't see it, but to utilize the world around us to be godly, to be good, to be elevated, to be for a higher purpose. Even as we're stuck in the view that we have, that there is a separate world and I'm a separate entity, I'm trying to transcend that. And if that's true, what that means is that there's nothing in the world that cannot be utilized for a divine purpose. There's nothing in the world that doesn't have a higher meaning and a higher purpose and is a part of the divine plan. Well, the most central prayer of Judaism is the Shema prayer. And in the Shema we say, Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, the Lord our God, Hashem Echad, the Lord is one. And what we mean by that is not just that there's one God, but God is the one. He's it. He's the all-encompassing entity, the all of everything. He's the one. And we cover our eyes when we say that prayer because we don't see that. We don't see it with our eyes. We see multiplicity. We see you and me and a world and all these different things. But on a deeper level, everything is one. Everything is a part of God's oneness. So we cover our eyes and contemplate on God's oneness, that God is the one. He's the it. He's all there is. Because we don't see it with our eyes, but we have to think it with our mind and connect it to that idea. And this is a very powerful idea because you can contemplate that on whatever's going on in your life and think it's all the one. It's all the one God. Meaning, some things happen to us that we're happy with, and we thank God. This is fantastic. I'm so pleased that God has given me this opportunity, this work opportunity, this relationship that's happening, this business that's going well, whatever is going on in my life that's going well. I'm healthy. This is fantastic. God has been good to me. But then there's other stuff that happens in our lives that are not so good, certainly on a revealed level. We go through difficult, challenging, difficult, painful times. And the feeling is, well, is that God too? Is God in the good and the bad? Well, of course, yes, because monotheism is there's only one God. Everything that happens is from the one God. And so whether it's good in my eyes or not, it's all from the one God. And if I contemplate that, if I think about that when I'm saying the Shema, I think whatever I'm going through, it's coming from the one God. So then the good things I'm thankful for. The difficult things I accept because I know that there is a higher purpose here which I am not privy to. But it's coming from the one source. It's not two different sources. It's not that there's God and there's the Satan on the other side, or there's some devil or some other force. There's only one God, and everything that's happening to me is coming from that same one God. Whether I see the blessing in it or not, and I may never see the blessing in this lifetime, I may never understand why that's happening or why this was really good, I may never see that, but it's coming from the one God. And that can get me through it. It can get me through it with faith. So if this is true of everything in the world has a divine purpose. What about atheism? What's the divine purpose of atheism? What's the holy use of denying God? If everything is a part of God's universe, well, that includes everything. Everything means even the denial of God, atheism. Where does that fit in? So I'm going to share with you a few Kabbalistic responses to that, which are fascinating and will open us to a different way of thinking. We'll go from simpler to deeper to even deeper. The first one we'll start with is the teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. He was a soul doctor, an incredible mystic and a very holy man who would teach his students. He would sit with his students on a daily basis and he would just teach them deep ideas, and they would ask him questions, and he would reveal different layers, higher layers of understanding. He once was sitting with his students and they asked him an interesting question. They quoted a Talmudic passage, a passage from the Talmud, the great compendium of Jewish wisdom from 2,000 or so years ago. In the Talmud it says that for every forbidden thing that we're not allowed to do in the Torah, there is a permissible version of it that you can experience. And it lists a few examples. Anything that's forbidden, there's a permissible version. For example, it says, the Torah forbids the eating of blood. You can't eat the blood of an animal. To eat an animal, you have to soak the blood out. You're not allowed to eat blood of an animal. However, you are allowed to eat liver. And liver does have a lot of blood in it. Liver is kosher. When you're eating the meat of an animal, you have to soak it and get rid of the blood. When you're eating liver, you still have to kasher it, has to be made kosher, but liver has the same taste as blood. So if you have a real desire to taste the blood of an animal, you can eat liver. Another example it gives is pig is prohibited. We're not allowed to eat pig. But there's a kosher version. There is a kosher version of pig, and I'm not talking about fakin. There's a kosher version which is the brain of a shibuta fish. Says the Talmud, there's a species of fish called the shibuta, and its brain tastes exactly like pig. If you want to taste what pig tastes like, get the shibuta fish, cook its brain, and you'll taste pig.
Who discovered that, Rabbi?
A non-Jew. they asked their neighbors, "Can you taste this and that?" And yeah, it tastes exactly the same. So, what is this fish, by the way? We don't know. You can do some research. There are some theories of what fish it is, but I'll leave that to another time. So, the students of the Baal Shem Tov quoted this Talmudic passage. It says everything that there is forbidden, but there's a way to do it in a kosher way. There's a kosher version of every prohibition. Everything you're not allowed to do, there's a kosher way of doing it. So the question was, what's kosher atheism? What's the kosher way to be an atheist? To deny God? If there's a kosher version of everything, so what's the kosher way? What's the permissible way of denying God? So the Baal Shem Tov said to them, when you see a person suffering, when you see a person going through pain, you have to behave like an atheist. You see, a believer, when you see pain and suffering, a believer knows that there's meaning to pain and suffering. There's a reason for everything happening, that God is in control. If somebody's going through a bad, difficult time, God decided for that to happen, and there is a reason for it, an ultimate good reason that we may not be able to see, but there is a reason, there's a purpose to all suffering. So a believer could possibly see a person suffering and keep walking, because there's meaning to that. I don't want to destroy the gift that God is giving you. I don't want to take away the blessing that God is delivering to you through this suffering. God decided you should suffer, so it should stay that way. You could think that way if you're a believer. That's when you have to act like an atheist. What does an atheist do if somebody's suffering? Well, you can't say, well, God's looking after it. There's a reason. You have to stop it. You have to intervene. You have to act like there's no God. When you see somebody else suffering, that's when you have to act like there's no God. For your own suffering, when you're going through a painful time, so that's when faith is going to be very helpful. Because without faith, you can only see the pain, and the pain is meaningless, it's hurtful, you're being put down. What possible good is there? When you have faith, you can say, there's meaning in this, there's purpose in it, and that can get me through this difficult time. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and alleviate your own suffering as well. You should. Maybe that's what God wants you to do. But at least the faith will take the edge off the suffering. When it comes to somebody else's suffering, then you have to utilize an atheist attitude, which is, it's not God that's going to help them, I have to help them. I have to intervene, I have to do something. I can't just say, this is in God's hands, He decided, and so He'll look after it. I have to do something, I have to intervene. I have to be there for that person. So that, the Baal Shem Tov said, is the kosher version of atheism, using the denial of God to intervene when somebody else suffers. Now, of course, that is God's will. That's what God wants us to do. In the great mystery of this life that we have, we cannot understand why suffering happens. And it's a topic of its own, but all the great sages agree that when it comes to suffering, we don't have an explanation for it. Not one that is satisfying, not one that we can understand, that we can relate to. But we do know that the existence of suffering is the biggest impetus for us to do good. All the kindness and the beauty and goodness that there is in the world is because there is pain and suffering in the world. And so we have to be kind. We have to get out there and be kind. And that is inspired by the divine. But for a believer, it means you have to intervene and not rely on God at that moment. Not believe in God. Yeah? Yeah, sure.
But Rabbi, isn't it then that it's not that by not believing in God is what motivates you to help? In a way, it's what motivates you to help is that you believe in something greater and that you should love your neighbor, and so that's what is actually, it's because of the belief in Hashem that you actually want to help.
Correct.
Not because you're denying Hashem.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right, and we do see that throughout history, it has often been those who believe who've done the greatest acts of kindness and care for others. All the hospitals, are named after religious movements. Who built hospitals, and why are you building hospitals if you believe in God? Let God look after the sick, or if He made people sick, then they should stay that way. No, we see that always people have been inspired by the commandment to care for your other. Do not stand idly by the blood of your brother, and love your fellow as yourself, and to care for the weak and the downtrodden. That's certainly true. But if you think about it, theologically, that's difficult to understand. If I really believe in God, that means everything that happens for a reason. And it's supposed to be. And there's a divine plan. If I'm intervening with that, I'm intervening with God's plan, am I not? How do I reconcile that? If I truly have faith, so whatever happens, let it happen. Just let it. It should make me passive. But it doesn't. You're right, it doesn't. And that's because we've been taught that no. We have to do everything that is needed. Maybe the only reason God makes these things happen is for me to respond. I don't know, but I know I have to do good. We don't justify the divine decree when somebody else is suffering. We don't say it's meant to be and it's meant to happen, and so you're meant to suffer. We go against it and say, I'm going to stop. Maybe God said, you're sick, I'm going to make you better. Maybe God said you should suffer, I'm going to alleviate your suffering. There is a movement against faith that we have to be able to do that. So I think this is what the Baal Shem Tov is teaching us. Don't mix your faith with your insistence on helping and intervening when somebody's in pain. There's two different directions there.
But what happens when you're in pain? You've got the suffering.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't used it yourself.
So there, you have to also do both things. You have to, on the one hand, alleviate your suffering. Go to the doctor, get help, do what you need to do. But you can use your faith also to understand the almost knee-jerk question we ask is, why is this happening to me? Why am I suffering? Why is this happening to me? That's where we need faith to say, well, we don't know why, but we know that there is a divine meaning to everything, and there's a direction and a purpose for everything. And why we don't know. We don't have the answers.
I could be wrong, but wasn't it the Rebbe who said that it's fine for Holocaust survivors to be atheists?
I'm not sure if he said that it's fine for Holocaust survivors to be atheists.
Not believe.
I think I don't know the exact quote of that one, but the Talmud says that you cannot question somebody who has their dead in front of them. Don't question the person who is suffering a loss. Don't question what they do, what they say, what they believe. That's not a time to question. And somebody who's gone through extreme suffering has their dead in front of them all the time. And so, yeah, we don't question or judge somebody for what they've been through. And we see also that a lot of those people do have a very deep faith, which may be expressed as anger at God. You can have somebody who spends years of their life being angry at God for something. Well, that's an expression of faith. You can't be angry at a non-entity. There's somebody you're angry at. Okay, you're angry. That's the relationship. But yes, certainly we don't, and that's why when it comes to anybody else's suffering, we make no judgment whatsoever. But when it's you, so you need to try and lift yourself from the moment to alleviate your own suffering, but also find a point of faith of acceptance. And I think it's interesting. I think we are more troubled by other people's suffering than by our own, in a way. Or putting it another way, people who are going through very difficult, terrible times are often the most inspiring people with the strongest and deepest faith, and people observing it are more the ones with the questions. And we've seen that with the hostages and their families. The incredible faith and resilience and positivity that they've been able to muster in an impossibly difficult and horrendous nightmare, it's unbelievable. We look at it and say, we're struggling with our faith, but hostages in Gaza who are taking on keeping Shabbat while they're there, and their parents doing the same. Them starting to pray. They never prayed before, but they're starting to pray there. It's unbelievable. It boggles the mind. So sometimes the person in the suffering actually touches a deeper part of their soul. Something's revealed. Watching it, observing it is more painful from a philosophical perspective. Sometimes the people in it are finding deeper faith. So this is the Baal Shem Tov's teaching on atheism, that there's a use for that muscle of denying God, and that is when we do kindness, when we intervene. It's pushing God aside. We're not leaving it up to God. We're not letting Him fix it. We're not saying He decided, so we're going to leave it in His hands. We're going to intervene and we're going to do something. And it's a fascinating dichotomy. Yeah.
Let's say when somebody's suffering and they're on their deathbed, and from that perspective, if we took in the concept of wanting to prevent their suffering, we would give them morphine, right? But that we're not allowed to do that because that would be seen as taking on Hashem's role.
Okay, great question. So alleviating suffering and alleviating suffering is not necessarily the only or the highest ideal. There are other ideals as well. Saving somebody's life could be higher than saving them from suffering. life itself is even dearer, or taking away somebody's life by taking away their suffering, that's a clash of ideals where there's a higher ideal, which is life over suffering. So yeah, it's not saying that suffering is the only calculation here. Because then there's a very wide range of people suffering, and killing them would take them out of their suffering.
But that's an example of if you were using the logic of taking the atheistic approach.
You meaning that so an atheist would say?
So an atheist would say,
okay, correct.
I'm not going to I'm going to intersect with divine intervention
Okay.
because it's...
Okay, good point. So the Baal Shem Tov is not saying, he's not giving a blanket permission to be an atheist and to apply the values of an atheist to alleviate suffering. He's not saying that in all cases that's correct. He's saying, don't say God decided that they should suffer, so I'm not going to intervene, alleviate their suffering. But of course, there are other calculations that need to be made. Doesn't mean to do everything that an atheist would do.
When you relieve someone's suffering, you're not denying that God made it, that God made that suffering. An atheist doesn't believe in God. You still believe in God whilst you're alleviating suffering.
Correct.
Why does an atheist...
But looking at it from a just purely theological perspective, God does the right thing, not the wrong thing. Yeah? Everything that God does is right. If you believe in God, what he decides to do is right. He's wiser than me. He's smarter than me. He's more powerful. He knows what's right. He's decided this person should be suffering right now. So who am I to take away that suffering? If God wants that person to not suffer, he'll stop it.
An atheist doesn't believe in God. And that you are helping that guy, but you still believe in God.
Correct. So again, the Baal Shem Tov is not saying be an atheist. He's saying utilize denying God, push God out of the picture when you need to help the person. Meaning, don't use your faith as a means to not help, to not do. Well, God will help. And this, by the way, this can be applied to many areas of life, and it's a very important principle where faith, from a Jewish perspective, does not mean being passive. We believe that God decides what will happen, and yet I have to do everything to make the right thing happen. If I want to get a job, so I don't sit home and have faith and say, God will give me a job. I have to go out there and interview and apply and look and make effort, all the while believing that only God will decide if it works or not. I have to show up to the interview and I have to do a good job, but there's no point in lying at my interview, because lying's not going to get me the job, because God doesn't like lying. He likes truth. And there's no point in getting upset if somebody else gets the job, because that was meant to happen and that was what God decided. But I can't just sit at home and wait for it to happen. I have to make every effort. This is much harder. It's much easier to either one extreme or the other. Either it's all in my hands, I've got to do it, I'm in control, or it's all in God's hands and I've just got to sit back and let it happen. Our faith is you have to do everything to make it happen and believe that nothing is in your hands, it's in God's hands. And that's what the Baal Shem Tov is saying. To be a complete believer and also to make every effort. The effort part, the action you're doing is like an atheist. I've got to make the effort. There's no God. The belief is there's only God. Yeah?
Are you, in summary, saying that we, as Jews, through our practice and traditions and how we are, we almost intuitively have this inner conversation of I believe God's doing this, but also, and then Kabbalah is coming and explaining where it comes from and why we are able to both say it's in God's hands, but also we need to do what we can.
Yes, correct. So there's that dichotomy which we have to become comfortable with. Yeah. Become comfortable with this. It's two opposites, but okay, that's okay. God's okay with dichotomies, with contradictions. That's cool. We can be too. Yeah, exactly right. I want to take it a little bit deeper now. So there was the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. His name was Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. He was also an incredible mystic, very original thinker. And he dealt a lot with atheists. He enjoyed conversing with them and hearing their opinions and trying to answer their questions. And he taught that in his experience speaking to atheists, the questions that they had, the challenges that they have about God and about faith came in two forms. There were some questions that could be answered. Some questions people have that you can answer, you can explain, and you can solve their problem, and you can answer their question. And some you can't. There's some questions that just don't have an answer and cannot be solved. The question is a question, and there's no satisfying logical answer. And he said that's because in God's emanating into this world, he is present here in two different ways. There is the way that God is in the world, but he's hidden. He's hidden. He's here, but he's hidden. And when he's hidden, you can always reveal him. A hidden being is under the surface, it just needs to be revealed. And so there are certain mysteries in life that we can't understand at first glance, but if you dig beneath the surface, you find the wisdom. There's something under there. But the Kabbalists taught that in the beginning of creating the world, God created an empty space. One of the central teachings of Kabbalah is called the Tzimtzum, which means contraction. And that is, putting it in the words of the Kabbalists, that before anything was created, before the universe or any existence, there was just God. God filled all of existence, meaning there was just God. There was nothing else. God decided that he wants a universe. Why? We'll discuss another time, but he decided. He wants a universe, he wants people, he wants us. But where are you going to put it? Where are you going to put this universe? God fills all of existence. There's nowhere to put it. There's no room for anything else. Meaning, God's infinity is there. In the realm of infinity, everything else is subsumed, is swallowed up, doesn't exist. Where's this world going to go? It's a finite, defined, exact world. Where are you going to put it? So the Kabbalists solved this problem by explaining that God created an empty space. That he vacated a space, he contracted his presence, and created an emptiness. And in that emptiness, he created the universe. This is a huge topic. This topic takes volumes and volumes of Kabbalistic explanation, just this idea of God creating a vacated space. What was there? Nothing? Nothing was there? Was God there? So there's a place where God isn't? No, of course God's there. He's just completely undetectable in that space. You can't say that there's a place where God is not. God is everywhere. He's everything. He fulfills all. But in order to create a world that is autonomous, separate from him, that has free choice, beings like us that have an identity that exist, God had to vacate a space where his presence is completely undetectable. And then in that space, he created a universe that has little sparks of him, little peaks of him, little bits and pieces where you can find him. But he first had to create the vacated space in order to create the universe. And Rabbi Nachman said there are some questions that come from that vacated space. There are some questions, because the very foundation of our universe is a space where God made himself completely undetectable. There are some challenges to faith that you just can't answer. There's a level of reality where God cannot be found, of absolute mystery, not hiddenness where God is hidden beneath the surface, but he can't be found. Not that he's not there, he's absolutely there, but he's completely undetectable in that space. And these are the questions that we can't answer. This is where atheism comes from the space where God is undetectable. Now, it's very important to remember that the Kabbalah spent a lot of time explaining that undetectability is only on the surface. It's only he's not detectable. He's not there. In fact, in some ways, he's there more than anywhere else. Because detectable godliness would have to be finite. Undetectability, where he's beyond being detectable, that's where his absolute self is. Again, if God is detectable by us, well, that must not be his real self. Because God's real self is infinite, and infinity is beyond us. So anything that is not beyond us, anything that is detectable by us, must be finite, and that's not his infinite self. And so, reaching God's undetectable self, asking a question that's impossible to answer, recognizing that there are levels and layers of God that are completely beyond what we can understand, that is reaching a deeper level of God. And the questions of the atheists push us there. I'll put it differently. There was another great mystic, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. He was famous for his ability to find the positive in everyone and everything. He'd always look at the bright side of every person and find the good in everyone. There's a famous story of where he once saw somebody smoking on Yom Kippur. You're not allowed to smoke on Yom Kippur. And this person was walking the street smoking on Yom Kippur. So he said to him, my dear friend, you probably don't realize it's Yom Kippur today. Obviously you didn't realize it's Yom Kippur. He just assumed you didn't realize it's Yom Kippur. That's why you're smoking. He says, I know it's Yom Kippur. He said, oh, okay, so I guess you don't realize that in the laws of Yom Kippur you're not allowed to smoke. You probably didn't realize that you can't smoke. He said, I know full well you can't smoke on Yom Kippur. What do you think, I'm an ignoramus? Of course you can't smoke on Yom Kippur. So he said, okay, so obviously you have a health condition that requires you to smoke because otherwise it risks your life and then you're allowed to smoke on Yom Kippur. He said, I'm completely healthy, I'm fine, I have no issue. He gave him 3 chances that he could get out of it. He said, no. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak turned to God and says, God, look how honest your people are. Look how truthful. He was able to find the positive in even someone who was like dismissing him. So it once happened that I believe it was on Rosh Hashanah that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak went out of his house and he was about to go to shul for Rosh Hashanah, high holidays, the New Year, and he saw the local atheist walking by, and so he said to him, "Oh, come with me. It's Rosh Hashanah today. Come with me to shul." And he said, "Rabbi, me come to shul?" He said, "Yeah, we have to pray for a good year. Come and pray with us." He said, "Pray, Rabbi? I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God." So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak said to him, I guarantee you, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. What does that mean? What does he mean by that? Did you understand that?
Yeah.
What's he saying?
So you don't believe in God, so I don't believe that you the God that you don't believe in, and that I believe in God. It's a negative, so therefore it's positive.
The God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in.
Yeah.
Well,
He doesn't
Because
believe
it's
in
got
God
his
that
own
doesn't exist.
conception
So he
of
also
what
doesn't
God
believe
is.
in God that doesn't exist.
right. That the picture you have of God that you're rejecting, I reject it too. I agree with you. There was an image that you have of God based on your education or lack thereof, based on experiences you had, based on things that people told you, based on ignorance, whatever it is. You have a picture of what God is, and you rejected that God. I agree with you with that, because that God is not true. You have maybe an infantile view of God as being like Zeus. The pictures of Zeus, like on top of a cloud with a thunderbolt ready to strike down, like, you know, an old man with a white beard type of thing. Like you have a picture of that God who is chasing, out to get you, looking at you to see if you do the wrong thing, and he wants to get you. That's the God that you rejected. I also reject that God. I don't believe in that one either. That's not the God that we believe in. This vengeful God, evil God, or this God who's like a kindergarten teacher who's like rewarding this one, punishing that one. We don't believe in that God. We believe in a God that is way beyond that infantile view. And so I agree with you. What you're rejecting, I agree with you as well. The power of atheism is to reject the false gods that we've developed, and to take us up with the questions that atheism may ask to a higher view of God that is more true, that is in that vacated space. That God, the God that is infinite and beyond, not the God that people have developed and made in their image, but a God who made us in His image. And so in that way, atheism is a partner for that, to go beyond. You know, we all have a certain picture of this divine being. And it's interesting, the Kabbalists say that if you want to go to the deepest depth of God, look at the way a child looks at God. A child doesn't have a picture, a limited picture of God. A child just knows that God is there, everywhere, and you can ask anything, and He can do anything. There's an unlimited, undefined view of God that a child has. So the Kabbalists said that level of God that a child has, that's the essence. When we become more developed and more sophisticated, we develop a sophisticated, complicated view of God that we're creating. That's our creation. But the essence, the simple essence of God is what a child sees. And that is that it's just God, and God's there. And children get answered all the time. Their prayers are answered all the time. And they see God all the time because He's in everything. In fact, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he writes that the fact that children have such an innate, natural faith in God is because that essence of God is everywhere. The revealed level of God is not everywhere. God is not revealed everywhere, but His essence is everywhere, is available to all. So even a child just naturally, innately believes. They don't need any convincing. They have an innate faith. And so this is the deeper meaning of what Rabbi Nachman taught, that there are certain questions that can't be answered because they come from that vacated space, meaning that there's challenges that atheism bring that lift us up from the finite view of God to an infinite view of God, to a much deeper view of his being. The God that you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. The God that atheism is rejecting, we don't believe in that God either. There's a far deeper level. And finally, I want to take it one step deeper. The Kabbalists speak about God being immanent and God being transcendent. Immanent means present. Transcendent means being beyond. Or the way it's put in the Zohar, the fundamental work of Kabbalah, God fills all worlds and surrounds all worlds. This was stolen by Star Wars. And the Force, there's a line, I think Obi-Wan Kenobi says it, that the Force fills all worlds and surrounds all worlds. He's exactly those words, straight out of the Zohar, but it's not the Force, it's God. Fills all worlds and surrounds all worlds. Fills means we are alive at this moment because divine light fills us. As we sit here, we feel our life. We are aware that we are alive. That feeling is feeling God. That is feeling a divine power inside of us, that we're alive. We breathe in and we breathe out, and our heart beats. This is divine life force. This is our personal divine spark. That is our life. We feel joy or pain or whatever we're feeling, but all of those feelings, that life is God filling our existence. And we look at the universe and we see that the planets growing and the sun coming up. This is divine energy and enlivening the universe, filling all of existence. That's one level of God. And that's one way to connect to Him. You can connect to God through connecting to the life force that He creates and the world and the universe that He creates. Being inspired by looking at nature or feeling your life, that is connecting to God. That is a divine experience. But God is not limited to that. God is not limited to the universe. When we say He fills all worlds, yeah, that's just a smidgen of a ray of a reflection of His energy. But He is beyond the world. He's beyond the universe. We look at the universe as being this expansive, endless, incredible, complex creation. For God, it's a speck of nothing. Because God is infinite. He's completely beyond the universe. Completely higher and beyond and not limited to the universe. When we say God is everywhere, that's limiting Him. Everywhere? That's space. That's a limitation. That's a description. God is completely beyond that. He's infinite. So when we praise God for creating the universe, for giving us life, it's true. That's true. He did. But that's not saying how amazing it is that you're able to do that. We're actually saying how amazing it is that you are humble enough to limit yourself to a universe. A universe is a limited, finite speck of nothing in comparison to the infinite divine. It's not an achievement that He was able to create a universe. It was an achievement that He was able to confine Himself to a universe. Because He's infinitely beyond. So God is immanent. He's within the world. He fills all worlds. But He is also transcendent. He's beyond all worlds. And it's important to we start at the bottom and we go up. We start with our existence, our life. That's what we're familiar with. And we start by feeling gratitude for being alive. The first prayer we say in the morning is thanking God for giving us our soul, for giving us our life, because that's our point of reference. That's where we start with. But then we need to graduate from there to remind us, but God is completely beyond this universe. He's not defined by the universe. He's beyond it. He's finite in the universe, and He's infinite beyond the universe. But the Kabbalists then say, but there's actually a third level of the divine, and that's called His essence. Atzmut in Hebrew, His essence. That is His very, very self. So while we can describe God as filling all worlds with His life force, we can describe God as being beyond the world because He's infinite, but there's another level where we can't say anything. We can't describe with any words. There is nothing we can say about it because anything we say is a description. And any description is a definition, which is finite. We can't say that He fills the worlds, and we can't say He's beyond all the worlds because both those are descriptions. We can't even describe Him as being infinite because the infinite is also a description. One of the Kabbalists said that, well, if He's infinite, then He must also be finite. Because if He's not finite, then He's not infinite. Get it? If you're infinite, that means you're limitless. There's no limits. So you must also be limited. Otherwise, if you're not limited, so then you're limited. Get it? So there's a level of God's essence that is beyond any description. That level cannot be described even by the word existing. You can't even say that he exists on that level. Because even existing is a description, is a limitation. Existence is an anthropomorphism. It's a human description. It's a borrowed term. To say God exists on that level is even not accurate. So what can we say? There's nothing we can say. There's no description on that level. So when atheists say God does not exist, yeah, we agree with that. We can agree with that. God's essence doesn't exist. There's no existence to God. Even is, any word you use, any name we use, it doesn't work. There is a deeper essence. What's the point of this? Where does this lead us? What are you supposed to do with this information?
Feel really insignificant.
So, when we feel God fills all worlds, we feel our existence and we feel significant. God fills me. When we then graduate and say, but God's beyond all worlds, he's infinite. That's when I lose my existence. God's infinite. I'm a speck of nothing in a speck of nothing of a speck of nothing of a universe. God's infinite, so beyond. But when you reach essence, nothing's insignificant. Nothing's small. Nothing doesn't matter. Because in God's essence, God is not limited to being infinite. Our tiny, finite, particular issue that we're going through, our life, our feelings, everything is hyper relevant to God's essence because it's a part of his essence. And on this level, we can see why you don't need to believe in God. You don't need to find him. You don't need to search for him. He's it. He's all there is. The whole search for faith and belief is looking for a thing. God is some existence, and I'm searching for him to see, does he exist or he doesn't exist? Is he real or not real? So I'm using the scientific method to find this entity somewhere, and I can't find him. No sign of him. It's using the total wrong language, because we're not talking about a thing that exists. We're talking about the essence of everything. God is the essence of everything, the truth of everything, including me, my inner essence, my deepest truth, my deepest being is God. So you can come to that not by analysis, not by research, not by searching and looking, but just by aligning yourself with true being. So in that way, the atheist project, the attempt to say that God doesn't exist, we can cooperate with that. We can take that and say, yeah, there's a point there. First of all, the Baal Shem Tov's point, and that is, when you see somebody suffering, don't leave it to God. Do something about it. Like an atheist, where there's no God to help, God's not going to solve it. You've got to solve it. You've got to help somebody else. We're into that. We can say to the atheist, the same God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. The infantile, immature versions of God that have been created, we can reject them as well. because there's something way deeper, way more real. The simple faith of a child. That's where we have to go, not the sophisticated, complicated version of God that we've created. And even the existence of God, making God into an existence, into a being, into a thing, no, it doesn't exist. So, what we've hopefully tasted this evening is a bit of the way that the Kabbalists view reality. We can do it as a little meditation, and maybe we'll finish with that. Now, because God is essence, you can close your eyes or not close your eyes, because if we're going by the essence, so then what you see, what you don't see, it's all the same. It's all the divine. But for some people it helps to close their eyes so they're not distracted by things. So you can do that if you want. But let's, just for a few moments, try and look at the world the way the Kabbalist looks at the world. And that is, first, from the perspective of God filling all worlds. We're aware of ourselves, of our surroundings, but we feel alive. As we breathe in and out, we feel a life force that fills our being, our self. That is a divine life force. And as we become aware of that, and we enjoy just the pleasure of being, we can feel a sense of gratitude that we've been given that gift. Our soul, which is our divine life force, but we can then graduate from that and recognize that our soul is a part of a bigger soul. That the entire universe is like one body, and there's a life force, which is the soul of that entire universe. And our soul is one extension, one ray of that soul. The universe's soul. And so from our small world, we've then expanded to the big world, the vast universe that surrounds us. And as we feel ourselves a part of that universe and one with it, we can then move a little higher and realize that that entire vast, expansive universe is actually just a tiny little speck. And the life force that's in it is just a little smidgen of a reflection of light from the infinite light that's beyond it. A tiny speck in an endless expanse. And as we feel that, suddenly we have disappeared in that speck. We're a tiny speck in the speck that is completely subsumed by an endless expanse. But just before we lose ourselves in that, we're reminded that there's deeper than that. There's God's essence, which is beyond being beyond. That cannot be pictured or described, but is the true reality of everything. And when we feel that, we can't really be feeling it. And if we picture it, we can't really picture it. But in our essence, we know it. That the depth of our reality, the essence of our soul, is the essence of God. It's not somewhere out there, beyond. It's right here. And it's the true reality of everything. So as we let that thought just hover for a bit, we can open our eyes and see the divine essence in everything. So a real Kabbalist would live like that all the time and be totally normal. Because if you're in transcendence, you're out of this world. But in essence, it's right here. You can be normal. Hopefully we can. Okay. Open for any questions. If anyone needs to leave, it's late as well. Welcome to leave. We'll continue next week, please God. If anyone has questions, happy to take questions. Comments. All right.
Kabbalah and quantum physics are very much in line with that.
Yes.
The whole idea of the energy and things exist, and sometimes it's just through our observation of the physical world. So it's the act of being seen to take place.
Mm-hmm.
We exist on a level beyond this world.
Yeah, there are some great books written on Kabbalah and quantum physics and the convergence of the two. And it's interesting because as we get closer to the final light of Mashiach, so the knowledge in the world and the divine knowledge start to merge together, which was unimaginable in the past. That you could take, these divine spiritual ideas and see them in science. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.